June is almost over. That means summer is going way too fast. I'm sorry to bring that to your attention, but I know for me, like some of you are just like, you're right, it is. Like, why did you say that out loud? No, I want to take the window to just say, thanks for being here. Like, you guys could be a million other places right now. You could be doing anything. And I'm just humbled and thankful that you're a part of this and that you're here on a Wednesday night when you could be doing a whole host of other things. My name is Ben. I serve and lead the Return, and just am excited about the series that we're in, Summer Anthems. We're doing a walk through some Psalms for the soul, kind of take a closer look at maybe some of the songs that we sing, what life kind of brings about, and the songs that maybe we should be singing through the life that we live and the life that happens in between. That's what we've been digging in on, and just this emotional journey through Israel's songbook. I'm trying to touch base on some different emotions and thoughts that kind of run through our hearts when we're singing songs, when God calls us to sing a new song. And so we spent some time talking about hope. We spent some time talking about heartache. Next week, we're going to talk about joy. And tonight, we're going to talk about fear. And so this unpleasant emotion caused by someone or something, and some of you are like, already unpleasant emotion caused by someone. Got it, like a name already is in your head, maybe, unfortunately. No, like sometimes it's because we think it to be dangerous or uncomfortable, or it brings about pain or grief. But this idea of fear, and fear is something that we find ourselves in often. On Friday night, this last week, I took my son, he's 9, Ezra, some of you guys know him. He kind of dominates my Twitter feed because what he has to say about life, I find to be fascinating. And took him out to the middle of the woods to go hiking in the middle of the night, and seemed like a great idea. And so what we did is we run off to Charlestown Park, and if you've ever been there, it's a beautiful park, and it's pretty cool when the sun goes down and the moon's not terribly bright. And so we're out in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night. We've got our water with us and backpacks, and we've got those headlamps, all right? And we're just walking trails, and there's all these big rock formations and bluffs, and some of these trails are kind of, well, it is wet, and so it's like a little bit slippery, and it's hard to navigate, actually, especially when the lights go out, like the sun, when it goes down. And there's a few times where it's like I don't know if you've ever been out in the woods late at night, but sometimes you're hearing stuff, you're like, oh, what is that sound? Like, is it going to get me? Like, there were 2 or 3 times, 12 times probably, where I kept turning around, like, 'cause I'm like, just make sure nobody's following us, and I'd peek back behind us. I had no reason to believe that somebody's following us, but now you're just like, yeah, that's spooky, right? Well, as we're walking around, we're hearing all kinds of noises. We're looking around for all those beady eyes that will pop back at you when you have a headlight on your forehead. And these spiders that were like the size of like ping pong balls, okay, without their legs. Like, they were even bigger. Like, I mean, I'm just telling you, the body of these things were huge. It was very unnerving. I was trying to figure out what kind of spiders these are. I'm not terribly scared of spiders, but these things were huge, and they're across every walkway. And what do they do at night? They catch all the bugs that are flying in it, and people that are hiking when they should be at home in bed, okay? And so we're seeing all these things, but Ezra is short enough that he can walk under a lot of them, okay? Well, there's a couple of times, he's just like, he wants to climb out on every cliff. He wants to climb out on everything. He wants to go off trail. He wants to take every spider home with him. He wants to catch a raccoon. And I'm like, I don't think we can or should do that, but I'm excited about his passion for it. And we're going through this whole thing, and I have the idea, I'm like, let's just shut the lights off for a second. So we flip the lights off, and we're just kind of standing there in the dark. And you look around, and like I can't see him. I know he's close, but I can't see him. And I'm looking around, I'm like, well, if somebody was up to no good, this would be the window that they did it, and I was reminded of kind of like, it is kind of spooky being out here in the dark, hearing all these noises. And then I hear this. Ezra goes, Daddy, can we just keep walking the trail without our lights? And I'm like, no, we can't do that. And I'm recognizing, like, there's things that like fears maybe I thought like you think you grow out of because you're used to walking around in the light, that maybe you're reminded of in those moments. that for whatever reason, a 9-year-old seems to not be terribly intimidated of. Like he wants to take every spider home. Again, every animal that he finds, he wants to take it home. And to him, he's like, I want to keep walking around. Like I want to try and walk this trail with no lights. And I just love how fearless my son is. And at the same time, I remember 5 years ago, before we moved down here, his little sister knew that he didn't like princesses or anything princess related. Okay, I don't know where this came from. Never coached it, never encouraged it. He does not like the color pink. He does not like princess or frilly things. And it would kind of send him into like, get away from me kind of things. Now, part of it was a fear. Part of it was just straight up annoyed. Well, what she would do, she would sneak into his room while he's playing, building something off in a corner. And she had these little Tinkerbell cards, okay? Tinkerbell lover. Ugh. Well, anyway, it's got these fairies on them, okay? She would go sneak up behind him, because if you've met Calla, you know she's itty bitty. She starts laying all these cards down. He has no idea. And she lays another row and another row to where he's completely surrounded in a corner with Tinkerbell cards. Then she steps out of the room, and then you hear screaming. Ezra is furious, and he's scared because he will not cross the Tinkerbell line. And his sister has effectively trapped him in his own room with Tinkerbell cards, okay? So, like, here's what I'm getting at. He didn't like to talk about it. And so if he watches this online, he's probably going to be frustrated with me. But, like, basically what I'm getting at is, like, sometimes we grow out of things, sometimes we don't. Sometimes fears are rational, sometimes they're not terribly rational. Like sometimes, like we'll be afraid of the most ridiculous thing. Sometimes there's things that are legitimate that maybe we should be more afraid of or more cautious with, that it's like, no, I'm going to keep walking around in the dark. We'll see if I walk off the edge of something, right? So what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Like I was looking this up, trying to think of some of the phobias. Oh my goodness, it's ridiculous. If you want to have a good laugh, there's some outrageous names of all these phobias. But like for some people, some of the most common things, flying. Anybody afraid of flying? Yeah? You're like, no, I fly all the time, right? Anybody afraid of falling? Yeah? You're like, if you've fallen before, right? Anybody like, what about public speaking? Anybody like uncomfortable with public speaking? Anybody uncomfortable with Ben asking you questions? You're like, just stop, Ben, stop. No, like we have fears, right? Whether it's the dark or it's heights or death or failure or rejection. Like suddenly there's things that maybe will hit home, or some things like spiders or commitment. And everybody's like, oh, I know some people that are afraid of commitment. Yeah, we do too. We follow you on Twitter. We read what you have to say. Like we get all of these verbal jabs in on so-and-so because of this or that. No, some of us were afraid of like commitment. We're afraid of like knowing someone or being known ourselves. Sometimes we're afraid of things like Travis or dentists. Anybody afraid of a dentist? Yeah, like some of you are like, you should be. No. We'll have some of them, like some of us are afraid of the end of the world or the end of America coming soon to a theater near you come November. Like, no, it's like we have fears that are rational and we have fears that aren't terribly rational. We have things that it makes every bit of sense to be cautious about, and some that it maybe doesn't. It doesn't make sense. And some of us, maybe it's snakes or needles or loneliness or clowns. Do you get any clown people? Oh, yeah. Like, how many of you love clowns? No? Yeah, some people are like, I love them. Like, my room at home is decorated in circus stuff, right? No. Some are rational, some are irrational. The reality is we can become quite fearful in our everyday lives without even knowing it. It can become so routine to be fearful that it becomes not just second nature, it becomes first nature to us. And so what we're going to do tonight, in the same way that we have been doing over the last few weeks, we're going to dig in on a psalm and start breaking it into some parts and start pulling from it some truths that we think that we can hang on to and start navigating life with, okay? So we're going to be spending time in Psalm 27 tonight. I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation. And so if you've got it, you can turn there or scroll there on your phone, whatever you want to do, but I'm going to break it into 3 parts, and then we're going to kind of dig in. So I'm going to read the first 6 verses real quick. Again, this is Psalm 27. It's a Psalm of David. It says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. So why should I be afraid? The Lord protects me from danger. So why should I tremble? When evil people come to destroy me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will know no fear. Even if they attack me, I remain confident." And then in verse 4 it says, "The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when troubles come. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. Then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his tabernacle I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music." All right, here's what I want you to see in these 3 parts. It's the beginning of a prayer. It's not quite the prayer, it's the foundation for prayer, okay? And so if you want to write in your notes there, foundation, it literally is his foundation for prayers, and he's highlighting God's provisions, okay? And so he comes out of the gates with identifying and saying out loud who God is. He says, he's my light and he's my salvation. He's my light and he's my salvation. That's worth writing down, because that is something that should be settling in on your heart. That he is my light and he is my salvation. Well, what does that mean? To say that he is my light, it creates this imagery of when you're on a trail and you're walking somewhere. It's a whole lot easier to see where you're going when the lights are on. That he lights up, he illuminates the path. And so what it's saying is, by him saying he is my light, he's saying he's the one I'm following. He's the path that I am on, and that path is him and it leads to him. My salvation means this: he's my safe place. He's where I'm headed. He's where I run to. He's where I preside. It's where I belong. So he's my light and he's my salvation. So pathway and safety in him. And he says, so why should I be afraid? Like, why should I tremble? So he comes out of the gate addressing fear, but he's addressing it through the frame of mind of, what do I have to be afraid of? If God is my light and God is my salvation, if he is where I'm headed and he is my safe place, do I have anything to be afraid of? Do I have any reason to tremble? He protects. So why should I be afraid? Why? Because there's spiders and there's clowns and there's Travis, right? I mean, that's what we will tell ourselves. We have every reason to be I don't know, man. Because we've allowed, whether the rational or the irrational fears, to maybe become our foundation instead of God as our light and our salvation. He goes on and says, whether it's when destination waits or pursues, or when enemies attack, or when armies surround, all these circumstances. Have you ever felt under attack? You ever felt pushed to the margins? You ever felt like everything was closing in on you? Maybe you were bullied. Maybe it was because people around you didn't understand you, and all you wanted was to be understood. I mean, isn't that a deep desire on our hearts? I mean, think about the conflict in your life. How many times is it because if they'd just understood what you were thinking, they maybe would have liked you, right? Or if you'd have understood them, maybe you would have given them a chance. He's saying, under all these circumstances, verse 3, my heart will know no fear. That's worth underlining. My heart will know no fear. Even if they attack me, I remain confident. So even if they come at me, I'm not just surrounded. Even if it hits me, I'm going to stay confident. Why? Because he's my light and he's my salvation. He's my foundation. Faith without fear. And so the question for us is, will we be faithful or will we be fearful? Because those are 2 totally different postures and 2 totally different ways to live. Will we be faithful or will we be fearful? Our fears can easily and quickly become our foundations. They can be what we stand on. Our fears then shape our prayers very quickly. David is choosing to not live in fear. He's choosing to find resolve in his confidence in God, not his own ability to fight off the armies, not his own ability to defend himself. His confidence is in a God that provides protection because his God is his light and his salvation. And the reason why I'm repeating that so many times is because my heart's desire is for you to know him as your light and your salvation. Because that's the only foundation worth building your life on. And so David is resolved to saying that. A faithful heart stands firm. A fearful heart falls fast. A faithful heart stands firm, but a fearful heart falls fast. When Kala was born, in October she'll be 7. We waited to be surprised in the same way that with Ezra, we waited to be surprised about what we were going to have. We just knew we were having a baby. And the pregnancy, everything was healthy. Everything was going smoothly, all that stuff. If you know my wife, Crystal, she's just amazing. And everything had just gone so well, healthy, all that. Until delivery time. And she's in labor, and I'm trying to be useful. I'm like all those weird breathing things, they exist. And I'm trying to be the husband that is there to encourage her. And this is like maybe the only times in the last, 18 years that I've known this woman that she does not think I'm funny, okay? And like, she's not mean, but she's not laughing either, okay? And I'm like trying to be ridiculous and just make her laugh, and she's not feeling that. Well, in the midst of all this, everything seems to be going all right up until this moment where one of the midwives recognized that the umbilical cord is wrapped around our baby girl's head, around her neck. And again, we don't know if we're having a boy or a girl. We don't know if this is our Kala or if this is what would have been Imris. And you see this moment where everything kind of stands still, and you see a look of not necessarily fear, but a look of concern, and then a look of taking action immediately because time is of the essence. And she, I'm trying not to be graphic here, she goes to resolve the issue by pulling the umbilical cord over her head, and it snaps. And so it breaks, but it breaks at her belly button. And so babies are small, and they can bleed to death pretty quickly if something of that nature happens. And that look of concern went to genuine fear in this midwife's eyes. And I see it. And suddenly the room kind of gets this awkward like shock. And you feel like you're outside of the room and everything is standing still. And yet at the same time, everything is moving really fast. And suddenly there's like more than a dozen people in the room that were not in the room moments before. And they're giving directives. And suddenly our baby girl is born. And she's not talking, or she's not crying, so we don't hear her, and we don't get to see her. And they take her over here, and they put like a wall of themselves between us and them. I can't see what's happening. I can't hear what's happening, because when babies are born, the plan is that they cry shortly after, so that you know they're breathing. And not hearing that, and I gotta say, in that moment, I was scared. I was like, what now? In that moment. And as a parent, like, it's hard to put into words what you're even thinking. I can't even hardly articulate it right now. I was kind of torn on whether to even share this story. The reality is, what I'm trying to get at is, like, we have fears. Fear is what happens when we recognize we have absolutely no control over a situation. And in that moment, I'm like, if there's anything I could do to trade places, I'd do it. And I'm trying to comfort my wife because they're not telling us anything. And thankfully, it's amazing what you can do with these 2 fingers to just pinch right here, long enough for some other people to stop bleeding. And as you know, we have a baby Calla. And no matter how old she gets, she's still going to be my baby Calla. But she is our miracle baby of, even in the midst of our fear, God is faithful in that. And he settled my heart. And it was amazing. He didn't settle my heart after I heard her. He settled my heart before. Because my first thought was fear. My second thought was, I need to be strong. I need to trust that he's good no matter what's about to happen. Here's the deal. As a parent, just to be completely vulnerable before you, there are things that I'm like, man, I don't want to mess up my kids. My guess is your parents don't want to mess you up. And some of you may be like, I don't know how good of a job they did. But you know what? Parenting is hard. It's very complicated. And a lot of conversations are coming a whole lot quicker than they were when I was growing up. I don't want to mess up my kids. I don't want to mess up my marriage. I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to fail you. I don't want to leave you in a lurch where you're looking for guidance and you're looking for counsel and Ben doesn't have answers. There's legitimate things that, whether they're fears or concerns or reasons to take caution, those are real in my life. And what I'm getting at is, if God, in the midst of having real fears, if God is our light and our salvation, we have nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear. So make God your foundation, not your fear. Make God your foundation, not your fear. In verse 4, 5, and 6, he's highlighting this request, this thing that he seeks more than anything. To live in the house of the Lord, to delight in his perfections, to meditate in his temple. The imagery here is being in the temple. The Ark of the Covenant represents God's presence with his people. And it's in the Holy of Holies. And what David is saying, I just want to be there. And it's this beautiful thing that literally is speaking about the mercy seat, okay? Which is, again, putting yourself before God in the presence of God. And David is saying, that's where I want to be. And I want to be there more than anywhere else. Why? Because that's where I belong. His deepest desire was to be and exist in God's presence. In God's presence is where I belong. He conceals me. He hides me. He places me out of reach. These are all provisions. These are all reasons that express God's faithfulness. And what does it do? It leads him to worship. This idea of offering sacrifices and shouts of joy and singing and praising. Here's the deal. His presence is the safest place that you can be. His presence is the best place that you can be. Is that where we want to hang out? When God is faithful, we have no reason to be fearful. So what's your deepest desire? Like what is it you're building your life on? What is it you're building your life about? Is it God's faithfulness or is it your fearfulness? Like what are you building your life on? Is it a fear that has maybe gotten a stronghold in your life? I mean, you go all the way down the list. I mean, if it's fear of failure that you wrestle with, then you're going to find yourself pushing everybody to the margins. Why? Because you want everything to be perfect. If your fear is rejection, you will compromise at every corner. Your character, whatever, if it means being accepted. See how quickly our fears can become our foundations. You go all the way down the list. Whatever the fear is, it can become your foundation. And it will then become your deepest desire to resolve that fear. And your deepest desire, there will be no room for it to be in his presence. Because you'll be trying to save yourself. And that's what takes you back to the first verse. You are my light and you are my salvation. You are my light and you are my salvation. So what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Don't let it be your foundation. Seek God most and your heart will know no fear. To seek implies the promise of finding. You know, you read other passages where it says, wisdom is, fearing the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We talk about fearing the Lord, and Jesus talks so much about have no fear. It's being in awe of God. And here's the deal. When we fear the Lord, you have no one else to fear. You have nothing else to fear. So let's read this next chunk. Let's read the prayer. So verse 7 and following. He says, listen to my pleading, O Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And my heart responds, Lord, I'm coming. Do not hide yourself from me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You've always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the path of honesty, for my enemies are waiting for me to fall. Do not let me fall into their hands, for they accuse me of things I've never done and breathe out violence against me. Okay, and so first you have the foundation for prayer, and now you have the prayer itself. First you have God's provisions, right? The reason for the foundation. And now you have David's problems, okay? So foundation to prayer, provisions to problems. And what you see in these passages, in this prayer, is a handful of things going on here. But you can hear the humility. David humbly is speaking, and it's because he's standing on firm beliefs. He's approaching him with humble awareness. He says, listen to my pleading. It's because he knows that God is listening. He says, be merciful. And it's because he knows that mercy is waiting for him. Because there's an invitation. Because he says this, he says, my heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. Do you know that invitation is to you? That God desires to be in a relationship with you where you come to him about everything. Where he says, come to me. Is our response, I'm coming. I'll be there in a second. Or I'm ready to be there now. Like, what is our response to his invitation? Here's the deal. Humble hearts stand on firm beliefs. Humble hearts stand on firm beliefs. And then you see more requests. He said, do not hide from me. That's a former fear. And what I mean by that is this. That's a fear that David once had and is rearing its head. Okay? That's a fear that he's moved beyond that is still coming after him. He says, do not hide from me. Do not reject me. Another former fear of rejection. And he says this, you've always been my helper. You've always been my helper. That's where his confidence is. But he keeps going, don't leave me now. Another former fear. Don't abandon me. Another former fear. Even if my mom and dad bail. Even if everyone who says that they love me pieces out on me. He says, the Lord will hold me close. The Lord will hold me close. So even in the midst of all these former fears that he's grown out of, that he's not afraid of anymore, they're rearing their head in this moment. And that's why he's saying, God, you are my light and you are my salvation. This is how you've provided. And these are my problems. And I'm bringing them to you because you've said, come to me. And in verse 11, again, you hear the humility here. He says, teach me how to live and keep me honest. Like, show me how to do this thing called life and keep my heart honest about it. So here's the thing to grab a hold of. Stay humble, stay teachable, and stay gracious. Stay humble, teachable, and gracious. Because enemies are still coming after him. He's still being bombarded by everybody and everything. And the same thing will go for us. We're still going to have enemies that come after us. We're still going to have fears trying to get a foothold in our hearts. But I tell you what, I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to be afraid of messing up my kids. I want to be humbly aware that the world is trying to teach them something completely different than what God would teach them. But I know this, the mantle of responsibility on a husband and a father is to lead my family to know Jesus. So that's what I'm going after. That's what I'm going after. There's no room for me to be fearful of what's next. And at the same time, those are things constantly coming after me. Fears that are maybe saying like, you're going to confuse your kid if you teach him this or you teach him that. How are they going to navigate the conversations at school when they learn new words and come home and be like, Daddy, what does that mean? It's like, well, wasn't planning on having this one for a little while. When you can't turn on the television or let your kid watch a video on YouTube without an ad painting a completely different picture of life than what God would paint. Like we're surrounded, we're bombarded with so many things that are trying to get a foothold in our hearts. I'm going to resolve to live in humble awareness. And here's the deal. A gracious heart will readily respond to a gracious God. A teachable heart, a humble heart, we will respond to a God that is trying to speak truth into our lives and put our foundation in him. So, is your heart humble? Is it gracious? Is it teachable? Do you have a teachable spirit? Anyone ever told you that? Are those character traits in you? Are you willing to let go of your fears for God to give you a stronger foundation? We're going to look at this last part here, the last two verses, where we move to the realization of prayer. And so let me read these last two verses real quick. Verse 13 and 14. So this is right after he's said, they accuse me of things I've never done and breathe out violence against me. They're still coming after him. He says this in verse 13, I am confident that I will see the Lord's goodness while I'm here in the land of the living. That means as long as I'm alive, I'm confident that I'm going to see how good God is. And in verse 14, he says, wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. Okay, so you see us move from a foundation for prayer to the actual prayer itself to the realization of that prayer. You see us move from God's faithfulness, from his provision, to David's problems, to now David's perseverance through that. So provision, problems, perseverance. You're seeing this transition where it's like faith encouraging faith. In the same way, we will spur others on, right? It's faith encouraging faith. And that key word, yet. So yet, in the midst of all of the mess, yet. And he says that he will have a posture of patience. In the midst of all the fears, he's still confident that God is still good. He's confident that God will still be God. And as long as he's alive, he's confident that that is what he will get to witness firsthand. I mean, do we believe that? Like, do we believe, or like, even as overwhelming as life is, do we believe that God's character is still good when we're afraid of so many things? Like, do we believe that? Because life is overwhelming. Even for a strong believer, there's things that get lobbed at us over and over again. But here's the deal. If we build our foundation on him, provisions, his faithfulness. If we strengthen our foundation in him, coming to him with our problems, we then live life on that foundation. Our perseverance shines. Like that's why a foundation matters so much. And that's verse 14. That's what it looks like to wait patiently. To wait patiently, to be brave and courageous, to let your hearts be so fixed on him that fear has no foothold in you. That you're so locked in on him. There's no room for something else to take a hold of your heart. And things may rattle you, things may shake you, but things will not move you if he has a hold of your heart. And it doesn't mean that things won't come after you. It doesn't mean that fears won't be lurking around every corner trying to swallow you up. It means that you know your foundation. And that's what takes you back to verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. I have nothing to be afraid of. The Lord is my light and my salvation, my light, my pathway. You're the one I'm following. Man, it is so much easier walking around with the lights on, isn't it? Ezra and I would never have gotten out of that woods if we hadn't turned our lights back on. And of course, he wanted to put the strobe option on, which is a great feature. If you're ever out in the middle of nowhere in the woods. But it's so much easier to move in light than it is to move in darkness. We're stumbling around in the dark all the time. Our fears are going to keep trying to keep us in the dark. So what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What fear has sway in your life? What needs brought into the light? Is there anything in your life that paralyzes you? You're like, yes, alien abduction. Some of you are thinking that right now. No, like, are there things that will paralyze you with fear? Just the thought of it. Maybe it's rejection. Maybe it's disappointing mom and dad. Maybe it's disappointing yourself. Maybe it's not meeting your own expectations of you. Maybe it's you're going after something that you think everybody expects of you. And you're so afraid to not hit that mark. You're trying to carry a load that you weren't made to carry. We have fears and they're real. What paralyzes you and keeps you living in fear? Tonight, after our groups, we're going to have an opportunity to name those fears and bring them into the light and get rid of them. And it'll just be an exercise that maybe gives us a marker of being able, maybe we know what it is, we've just never said it out loud. Maybe we know what it is, we've just never bothered to tell God that this is a fear I have and I want to be done with it. And I need it brought into the light because I don't want to keep moving in the darkness. And so after our group time, we're going to have an opportunity when we come back into this space to do that. But it looks kind of like this. So many of the songs we sing are fearful. Like a lot of songs we sing are fears of rejection or fears of failure or fears of heartache, fears of so many things. But the song we're called to sing is faith without fear so that we can move in the light. We just happen to live life in between. But the way we live life in between is wait patiently on the Lord. Be brave, be courageous. That means stand in the face of the things that you're fearful of because your foundation is so much stronger. And when your foundation is, there's nothing for you to be afraid of because your confidence is that God is still good. A faithful heart is a fearless heart. A faithful heart is a fearless heart. I'm going to pray. We're going to get in our groups.